thank you to each and every one of you for being here with us tonight. We are very pleased to be able to welcome those of you who have been with us for a long time now, and those who are new to the Legal Hackers Manchester chapter. My name is Janine, and I'm one of the co-organisers of Manchester Legal Hackers. And as the name suggests, we are the Manchester chapter of Legal Hackers, a global legal tech community that started in 2012 in Brooklyn, New York. We are a volunteer-run, chapter-based community that's free to join and open to all. We are called Legal Hackers, but it's very important to note that we are not actually hackers. The mission of Legal Hackers is to foster creative problem-solving at the intersection of law and technology, or what we call legal hacking. And we run our events on a monthly basis. The events include, but are not limited to, knowledge-sharing events like this, and legal hackathons, workshops, and social events. So yeah, this is us. And I'm just going to share my screen now for some housekeeping stuff before we start. Can you all see my screen okay?
Oh, good.
Yeah. And firstly, this event is being recorded. Just feel free to let me know if you have any questions or concerns around the recording. And please make sure your microphones are muted when someone else is speaking. And if the slides are too small for you, you can click switch to screen on Zoom to make it bigger. And finally, please use the chat box and send questions to our speaker, Will. And what you need to do is just select everyone and type your question in the chat box. That's all we need to do. And today we are honoured to have Will Foulkes, the head of blockchain and a senior solicitor from Stephenson Law, as our guest speaker, and Lisa McClory, the legal knowledge director from Fractal Legal, as our co-host. During the next 45 minutes, will be talking us through the basics of blockchain and crypto assets, which will then be followed by a 10 minutes Q&A section led by Lisa to address any questions you may have. So yeah, prepare yourself to be challenged, excited, and inspired. Let's welcome Will Foulkes. Over to you, Will.
Thank you. I think I'm also getting prepared to be challenged as well now. But yeah, thank you so much for having me. Yeah, so very brief introduction to me. I am a lawyer. I guess I'm about 7 years qualified now, and I've led a circuitous path. I started in London and then went to France for a few years, worked for a French law firm, which is where I got into blockchain. And then coming back to the UK, have chosen to really specialize in blockchain and crypto assets as what I do. So it's still, you'll see it's still quite new. A lot of you may probably have heard the name, and Bitcoin is the classic one, but may not understand quite how it works, which is usually where most people get to. So the idea of this presentation is to give you a real introduction, a basics, tell a few stories that hopefully will resonate and that will help you understand it. And then a bit about the law, because at least some of you in here should be legal people, I think, legal hackers. And but I won't spend too long on that. And then some actual use cases around the technology, so you can actually see what are people doing with it at the moment, and you'll see that it's not just theory. So I've got a little presentation that I will hopefully share with you now, if that works. Can you see my screen? I've lost you guys.
Oh, good. Well,
yeah, you got it. Cool, sweet, thanks. I will click present. I've even got a short video for you as well, so I hope you're all sitting comfortably. Yeah, so yeah, still thinks of school. Reminds me of school when they bring out the VHS player with the TV and everyone would relax. So I put a short video in that does a pretty good job of explaining it. This little cartoon, I saw it and loved it because that was me for quite a long time. It's reading a couple of articles and thinking like, oh yeah, that sounds great, cool. And before the pandemic hit, it was usually that you were at some kind of a networking event and someone would mention it and you'd be like, okay, and not really know what to say. So I guess this is almost in a way could form a bluffer's guide in the future. If ever you're in a situation where someone talks about this, hopefully you won't feel as lost as you did before. Yeah, introduction, we'll go through what blockchain and Bitcoin is. They're intrinsically linked. Blockchain is the technology behind Bitcoin, so it's where it's the first use case. What issues does it solve? Why do we have a blockchain? Very briefly on the law, and then as I said, some case studies. So The hard part is kind of, I put that towards the beginning because I think we have roughly a 20-minute concentration span. So I'll try and get through the heavy lifting at the beginning, and then the case studies are where it gets really interesting, and we can then crack onto some questions. So as I said, it's a short video to start you off that hopefully when I click this magic button will work. Jeff, can you hear it?
Many people think of blockchain as the technology that powers Bitcoin. While this was its original purpose, blockchain is capable of so much more. Despite the sound of the word, there's not just one blockchain. Blockchain is shorthand for a whole suite of distributed ledger technologies that can be programmed to record and track anything of value, from financial transactions to medical records or even land titles. You might be thinking, we already have processes in place to track data. What's so special about blockchain? Let's break down the reasons why blockchain technology stands to revolutionize the way we interact with each other. Reason number 1, the way it tracks and stores data. Blockchain stores information in batches called blocks that are linked together in a chronological fashion to form a continuous line, metaphorically, a chain of blocks. If you make a change to the information recorded in a particular block, you don't rewrite it. Instead, the change is stored in a new block, showing that X changed to Y at a particular date and time. Sound familiar? That's because blockchain is based on the centuries-old method of the general financial ledger. It's a non-destructive way to track data changes over time. Here's one example. Let's say there was a dispute between Anne and her brother Steve over who owns a piece of land that's been in the family for years. Because blockchain technology uses the ledger method, there is an entry in the ledger showing that Adam first owned the property in 1900. When Adam sold the property to Dave in 1930, a new entry was made in the ledger, and so on. Every change of ownership of this property is represented by a new entry in the ledger, right up until Anne bought it from their father in 2007. Anne is the current owner, and we can see that history in the ledger. Now, here's where things get really interesting. Unlike the age-old ledger method, originally a book, then a database file stored on a single system, blockchain was designed to be decentralized and distributed across a large network of computers. This decentralizing of information reduces the ability for data tampering and brings us to the second factor that makes blockchain unique. It creates trust in the data. Before a block can be added to the chain, a few things have to happen. First, a cryptographic puzzle must be solved, thus creating the block. The computer that solves the puzzle shares the solution to all of the other computers on the network. This is called proof of work. The network will then verify this proof of work, and if correct, the block will be added to the chain. The combination of these complex math puzzles and verification by many computers ensures that we can trust each and every block on the chain. Because the network does the trust building for us, we now have the opportunity to interact directly with our data in real time. And that brings us to the third reason blockchain technology is such a game changer: no more intermediaries. Currently, when doing business with one another, we don't show the other person our financial or business records. Instead, we rely on trusted intermediaries, such as a bank or lawyer, to view our records and keep that information confidential. These intermediaries build trust between the parties and are able to verify, for example, that, yes, Anne is the rightful owner of this land. This approach limits exposure and risk, but also adds another step to the exchange, which means more time and money spent. If Anne's land title information was stored in a blockchain, she could cut out the middleman, her lawyer, who would ordinarily confirm her information with Steve. As we now know, all blocks added to the chain have been verified to be true and can't be tampered with, so Anne can simply show Steve her land title information secured on the blockchain. Anne would save considerable time and money by cutting out the middleman. This type of trusted peer-to-peer interaction with our data can revolutionize the way we access, verify, and transact with one another. And because blockchain is a type of technology and not a single network, it can be implemented in many different ways. Some blockchains can be completely public and open to everyone to view and access. Others can be closed to a select group of authorized users, such as your company, a group of banks, or government agencies. And there are hybrid public-private blockchains too. In some, those with private access can see all the data, while the public can see only selections. In others, everyone can see all the data, but only some people have access to add new data. A government, for example, could use a hybrid system to record the boundaries of Anne's property and the fact that she owns it while keeping her personal information private. Or it could allow everyone to view property records but reserve to itself the exclusive right to update them. It is the combination of all these factors, decentralizing of the data, building trust in the data, and allowing us to interact directly with one another and the data that gives blockchain technology the potential to underpin many of the ways we interact with one another. But, much like the rise of the internet, this technology will bring with it of complex policy questions around governance, international law, security, and economics. Here at the Center for International Governance Innovation, we seek to bring trusted research that will equip policymakers with the information.
Okay, so that video is by the Center for International Governance and Innovation, and I'm saying that so that I don't get sued for all you IP lawyers out there. Yeah, right. Did everyone? Okay, cool. I won't open that up to Q&A yet. I appreciate that is a lot of information to absorb. So what I'm going to do now is slow everything down a bit and take you back to a story of what this technology is based on. The context to creation. And yeah, so if everyone, I don't know how old everyone is here in the group, but I imagine most people can remember or certainly have read about the financial crash that happened in the late noughties, so around 2008, 2009, when there was something called a credit crunch, which is where banks were so worried about how exposed their other institutions were, it froze the interbank lending market. So no one wanted to lend to other banks in case they went bust. And there was a huge loss of trust in our financial institutions. And yeah, bankers for a short period of time became more hated than lawyers. I don't know where we are right now. But yeah, so there was a group of people that decided that they wanted to create something that didn't require banks. They wanted to create a financial system that didn't require banks to sit in the middle of it. And but we need banks for a lot of reasons. And the idea of if you remove banks, you need to come up with a really, really good way to resolve something that's called the double spend issue. Because I don't know, just standing back quickly, is how bad it's got with banks is something like 96 or 97% of all money that's created is created by banks when they lend. And that is almost like a mic drop moment. It was a huge understanding how money works is a talk in itself, and one that Jay, who's on this, could probably do really, really well. But it's worth digging into just so that you understand how our current financial system works. And that will give you really good context to understand what the next generation or the next iteration of finance looks like. And that's an insane concentration of power in what are an unelected group of institutions. And it's kind of come about through lots of iterations, but actually they shouldn't have that much power. There shouldn't be that much concentration of control in these institutions. So this group of guys got together, and I think it was all guys, and they were called the cypherpunks, which is cool. And they wanted to create an alternative to centralized currency or government and bank-backed currencies. But to do that with digital money, they need to overcome something called the double spend issue. Now, if you think of physical money, which there's very little of it left anymore, but imagine that I had a £10 note in my hand now, and I took that £10 note and I gave it to Jay or to Jeff. Let's say I gave it to Jay because I'm feeling generous. There's no question that £10 has left my possession and gone to Jay. There's no question that it's a physical thing. It's left. I can't simultaneously give that £10 to Jeff. But with digital money, that's a real issue, because digital money is just numbers now it's on an app, or it's numbers in an account somewhere. And the only way that we trust that I don't give that £10 to Jay and then simultaneously give the same £10 to Jeff is that we trust our banks to debit my Monzo account and send it to Jay's Coutts account or whoever Jay banks with. We still trust them to do that, even if we don't trust them to invest in things like collateralized debt obligations or whatever they put their money in. So if you remove them as the people that are maintaining a digital ledger of money, what do you replace that with? And what do you replace that with that everybody trusts? Because if it doesn't work, if it breaks in any way and people don't trust it, that currency will be valueless. No one will use it because it could be, it's liable to fraud. So the way that these guys, the cypherpunks, what they looked to for inspiration was this tiny island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean 400 years ago called the island of Yap, which you can look up. It's a real thing. This photo is evidence of the fact that it's a real thing. And their monetary system was based on these things called rye stones. And so the story goes, one day a load of guys got in a canoe and they paddled to an island that was not an insignificant distance away. And there on this island, they found these beautiful green rocks that didn't exist on their home island of Yap. So they hacked off big pieces of said rocks, put them in their canoes, and then they paddled back home to their island of Yap. And there everyone was, oh, wow, these are beautiful. And they were carved into jewelry and also these things that you can see on your screen called a rye stone. As you can see, they weren't particularly movable. So they weren't like the coins that we had in our monetary system. And the way their monetary system would work is that like the chief of the village would have a huge rye stone outside his house to show what a big deal he was. And the way he would spend that is that he would gather all the villagers around. So it says 40 villages. He's like, okay, everyone gather around. And he'd say, okay, I'm going to give a third of my rye stone to Greg in exchange for his house. I don't know what the Yappies names are, but let's say Greg. Give it to Greg in exchange for his house. Has everyone got that? And everyone would say, yes, we were listening. Yes, we understand. A third of your rye stone has now gone to Greg. Got it. Thank you. So that if the next day one of them said, he didn't give it to Greg, he gave it to Mike, then everyone was saying, no, you weren't listening. You gave it to Greg. So what we have there is a majority consensus approving and validating that transaction. And provided you've got over 50% of those villagers agreeing, the integrity of that network, that group of people, is maintained. If few of them died, it would be fine, because provided you've got over 20 of them and provided you've still got a majority, doesn't matter that a few of them have disappeared, apart from the obviously emotional trauma associated with death. And equally, if someone got together and decided to collude and say, no, he gave it to me, he gave it to us, he didn't give it to Greg, he gave it to us, again, provided the rest of the villagers would reject that, and they'd say, no, you're lying, you liars. And yeah, no. So that's, so that what you have there is trust in that information, because you trust that they wouldn't all lie. Of course, there is the possibility that they could tip that majority consensus, so you could get 21 of them that were colluding together. And then that would break the system, because then you'd have a real problem. So the more villages that you've got, the less likely it is that you'll have what's called a consensus attack or a problem with that. But just starting back, so now that you've got a trusted way of recording data, so that if a Donald Trump of the time came to the island and wanted to buy it, he could interrogate those villagers. He could ask them and say, well, who owns what? Who do I have to pay for what asset? And he could trust that provided he got over 50% of them replying in the same way, he could trust that data. So that's exactly how blockchain works. But instead of villagers, it's computers, which are called nodes. And the way that obviously the data is stored is slightly different. So you have this concept of immutability, which means that the villagers can never forget. In reality, of course, some of them could forget because we're all human. But if a transaction is stored in the villager's memory, they will never forget that. So you couldn't come back in a year's time and say that he never gave it to Greg. It's there forever. But the essential concept is the same. So if ever anyone says to you, what is blockchain? And someone else says, oh, it's just a distributed ledger technology. That is a distributed ledger. The ledger, a record of transactions, and it's distributed because it's across everybody. So each villager has a complete record in their memory of who owns what. They know everything. It's not one chief of the village who knows who owns what, who could die and be corrupted or whatever. It's everyone knows everything. So that's exactly how Bitcoin works, which is the first ever cryptocurrency. And that's how it solves the double spend issue, because you can't have, because if one person said, I'm going to give my Rhinestone to Greg, and then I'm going to give it to Bob at the same time, people would say, well, you can't do that. You've already given it to Greg. So that's how it solves the double spend issue. Majority consensus, approving the transaction, and crucially, rejecting transactions that are fraudulent. So hopefully that will make sense. I can't check with you because I can't see you properly, but yeah, hopefully that makes sense. Bitcoin is the first, so that was the name they gave it, and that currency sits on, so there's a thing called the Bitcoin protocol, which is the set of rules that govern how the network works, and then there is the Bitcoin, the currency that sits on top of that. Bitcoin was just the first, and that blockchain, the Bitcoin blockchain, is very simple. It can just record those transactions, so one person giving to someone else. But since Bitcoin, there have been a lot more blockchains created and a lot more cryptocurrencies. In fact, so many, with so many new features, that the terminology has changed. You can still have a cryptocurrency, which is just a medium of exchange like Bitcoin. But most other ones now, the regulators are using this term crypto assets because they have more in common with assets than with currencies. And I'll tell you a bit about that in a second, but I'll tell you a bit more about crypto asset in a second. There's been a lot of fraud associated with these. You've probably read about it, certainly around 2017, with something called the ICOs, where everyone and anyone was creating their own coin or their own token and saying, oh, you should invest in the next best thing. It's amazing. It's going to change the world. Buy it, and people buying it and then actually got defrauded and lost their money. A lot of them were fraudulent, without a doubt, but a lot more of them were also just science projects. People were testing things that didn't work out. And a great analogy is to look back to the internet and the dawn of the internet around about in the 90s, when it really started to get traction with your dial-up modems and websites and email, and it was all exciting. And we had, and I'll comment on it in a minute, but internet startups, there was a huge dot-com bubble bursting, and a lot of the internet startups failed, and a lot of people lost a lot of money. And we still have the internet, and we still have Google, Amazon, eBay, the companies that survived, and those ones that survived have absolutely thrived and gone on to consolidate and dominate the market. So blockchain is the next generation of the internet. And that's a really good way to think about it. Blockchain is the internet, and things like Bitcoin, Ethereum, these crypto assets are like the internet startups that sit on top of the internet. So they need the internet to run, but they're fundamentally separate. So you can have a fraudulent crypto asset, you can have a fraudulent internet startup. That doesn't mean that the internet is a bad thing, and it doesn't mean that the internet doesn't work, and that or that the internet is going to go away. So just quickly, what is a crypto asset? Again, there's quite a few lawyers on this course, so I'll be brief, but a crypto asset is just a digital token. So a plastic token, think of like a locker token. It's a digital representation of a token, and you can give any features to it that you want. So if I was to issue the Will token, which, let's be honest, it's just a matter of time, the Will token, I could give any features to that I wanted. So the two kind of buckets to think about, if we put exchange tokens to one side for now, that's very basic. That's the Bitcoin. It's just for a medium of exchange for moving value from one person to another. The second bucket is an equity type thing. So an ownership in a company. So I have a company, Will's great company. And my token gives rights to dividends from that company, and it gives you voting rights at board meetings. So you can attend more meetings with your token, and you get a certain number of voting rights on the business of that company associated with that token. That would be a security token, would require, it would be within the FCA's perimeter, so regulated, and there are all kinds of things that come with that. An alternative, another one is it gives a share of a real asset, so a share of a house or a share of an art exhibition, for example. So you can give it you can do really anything you want with it. And the final one is something like a gift voucher, so what's called a utility token, that gives you access to a platform or service. And the great analogy is a gift card for a shop. So I always say Marks and Spencer's gift cards, don't know why, or like an iTunes voucher. All that gives you is a right to access that shop and exchange it for goods or services. It doesn't give you the right to attend board meetings or get dividends or anything like that. Okay, so it's much, and that is unregulated. You can do, it's more flexible. So everyone in the ICO boom was saying, mine's a utility token. And the regulator's saying, no, it's not. You're doing things like giving them profits and all that stuff. So that's where I come in as a lawyer, try and keep people out of prison. So that's a really good summary. Again, if you are confronted at a cocktail party, I'd love a cocktail party right now. Anyway, blockchain's the technology behind Bitcoin and other crypto assets. That's it. And just think about your villages and the rye stones as your how does it work. So what problems does it solve? Well, I've already alluded to a couple. So centralization of power and wealth in banking institutions. Data breaches is another really good one. So we've read about it a million times, and the problem with centralization of data in a service or centralization of servers is that you have a single point of failure or a single point of attack. And almost all large companies, it's starting to change a bit with the cloud, but you have a consolidation of data in one place. And what blockchain allows you to do, or what some blockchains allow you to do, is to spread that data out over multiple different places. So again, this functions slightly different to the Bitcoin blockchain, which has a complete record on everything. There are blockchains now where you could say, for the example of a photograph, you could decide to put 1 pixel of that photograph on each node. So each villager remembers 1 pixel. You have to get them all together, or you need a bit of each, a bit of data from each one to assemble the full picture. The other thing is they're backed by very strong cryptography, the best cryptography out there at the moment. And so a blockchain, for example, at the moment has never been hacked. Exchanges have, companies running blockchains have been hacked, wallets have been hacked, which is what you use to store tokens, but the blockchain technology itself has never been breached. So very, very strong cybersecurity. Record tampering is a really key one. If you remember that video we just saw about blocks being added to the chain, so once you have a new record that is validated by the community, so again, I'm giving Greg my rye stone, the community say, well, have you given all of your rye stone away yet? No, oh, there's still a third of it remains yours. Okay, we validate that you've got a third of that rye stone to give away. And we validate that Greg has a house to give you. So we validate that transaction. Everyone agrees that's a valid transaction. Once that goes on to the blockchain, you have this analogy. It's something called the Merkle tree, which is the mathematical algorithm that is very, I think it's highly improbable that it can ever be reversed. So once data goes through it, in one point it comes out the other end, it's almost impossible to work back. So you have this like a valve, if you like, with the data flow. And once it's on the blockchain, you can analogize that to a fly stuck in amber. So you have one layer of amber goes over it as the next block is added. And over time, the more blocks that are added, the more amber is added. And then you get this incredibly secure way of storing that mosquito. So that it'd be very, very difficult for you to go back and change the state of that mosquito. And that gets progressively harder over time. So that's a really good way to think about how record tampering is prevented. This is huge. So I mentioned the banks already. You can probably tell I don't have a huge amount of love for them. Sorry for any bankers on the call. Individually, bankers are lovely. Institutionalized, yeah. Anyway, so disintermediation in finance is huge. Disintermediation in other areas like music is also massive. So this, again, don't know how old everyone is. Jay and I certainly remember the era of CDs, where you would go to a shop and you wanted to buy an album, and that album could cost you between 12 and 16 pounds or something, say. And actually only 25 pence or so would go to the artist. The other, however many insert figure of that, goes to the intermediaries. So it doesn't work well for either person, right? It doesn't work well for the consumer because, gosh, that's a lot of money. And it doesn't work very well for the artist because, gosh, that's not very much money. We're kind of in an intermediary state with the 4 stages with music. The second one was Napster, people giving it away, nobody won. And we're now in the third stage, which is Spotify and Apple Music. So the artists get, I think, 0.0007 pence every time a song is played. So they get a bit, but it's still not ideal. And where we're going to is this. It's direct interactions between the artist and the consumer. And you can agree on $5 for an album. Brilliant. That's a lot more than 25 pence, but it's also a lot less than 16 quid. And the only person that loses out is the Warner Brothers, the Sony, whatever, that used to sit in the middle of that. So disintermediation is a huge advantage of the way that blockchains work. And it's because the villagers can all talk to each other independently of having to go through a chief is probably a good way to analogize that. Monopolization of data value. Again, I'll speed up a little bit because we've got quite a lot of ground to cover. But yeah, monopolization of data value is huge at the moment. So you've probably read about this, and it has issues with data breaches and hacks. But more than anything, we've been giving our data away for years. If you remember when Facebook came out and you could finally start to post images of yourself being cool with friends and having a fun time, it was very exciting to be able to publicize how great your life was. And over time, we've got very used to that, such that we give away so much of our personal lives voluntarily. And then, of course, there's all the stuff that we do that we don't even realize we're being tracked. Like we use Google Maps because it's really easy to use and it's free. And you don't realize actually that means that Google knows everywhere you've been. Apparently, one of the most terrifying things you can do is a data subject access request to Google, and you will get back a stack of like the most bone-chilling, frighteningly detailed information about who you are as an individual, like your likes, your dislikes, all that kind of stuff. So that's not to paint too dark a picture. There's a very positive side to that level of data, but yeah, there's no doubt that the most valuable companies are all data companies. And there's a great metric you can see on, I'm trying to get out, but where you can see the shift from petroleum companies and software companies, car companies rather, Coca-Cola, car companies, and the big oil companies, and then just seeing these software companies coming up the ranks and just completely blitzing it, and how much more these companies are now worth. Well, with blockchain, you get a couple of really exciting features. One, you can tranche your data and selectively decide what data you're going to release. And the second part of it is that you can get paid for that. So to give you a really concrete example of that is, you imagine you go into a shop and you are ID'd for alcohol, which happened to me still relatively recently because I have my youthful face. You are asked for your ID and you hold up your driver's license, usually. What do they need to know? Well, they need to know that you're over 18 in order to legally sell you alcohol. What do you give them? You give them your full name, your address, your DVLA number, your date of birth. You don't need to know your date of birth. You give them all of that. Unfortunately, most people don't have photographic memories, so the risk of them copying it and selling it is low. But nonetheless, you give away all that information for free and without reason. Well, imagine you could hold up an app that just said, yes, I'm over 18, like a green tick. And that person trusted that app. Well, you might then be willing to sell that data, sell the fact you're over 18 and that you're in that shop to someone. And it might be quite useful to a marketing agency, for example, to know how many people over the age of 18 have come into my shop today, because maybe I need to start selling more over 18 products, or equally under 18. So, and if you could sell that and you're willing to sell that, you then need to get paid in what's called a microtransaction. This is the other limiting factor at the moment, is that no bank would want to start paying you in fractions of a penny, because that data isn't worth very much. It would be a small amount that you get paid. But blockchain and cryptocurrencies allow you to get paid in very, very small amounts because there are very low fees associated with those payment transfers. So that is a key shift, and we're going to start to see that already. There are some companies coming out that are doing this, like Tap My Data. But there's going to be a shift of ownership of data from these big companies to us as individuals, and we will then start to be able to monetize that. So we will start to be able to make money from just walking around or driving places, which is very cool. Where are we with its development? Again, if you might have heard of blockchain, or why aren't we seeing it more? There is an awful lot happening, but it's still, this is something called the Gartner hype cycle, and you can Google this. There are a bunch of them. This is one specifically for blockchain. So it gives a really detailed picture of where we are with the different types of blockchain development. But we have 5 stages. You have the innovation trigger, the peak of inflated expectations, the trough of disillusionment, and the slope of enlightenment to the plateau of productivity. So any technology starts at the innovation trigger, and it then moves up. And so again, we can analogize this to the dawn of the internet. So in the 90s, you see all these internet companies going firing, and oh my God, the internet's going to change the world. And then suddenly, oh, that's going to be a lot of work. And then pop, 2000, it all bursts, and gosh, it's going to be an awful lot of work to get any of this to work. And it then plummets down to the trough of disillusionment. And from the trough of disillusionment, that's when people start to roll their sleeves up, really get stuck in with the technology, and it starts then to move up onto the slope of enlightenment. You might have noticed that this is dated in 2019. That was the last time that Gartner gave it away for free, and I haven't bought one yet. So we are now around about coming up now onto the plateau of productivity, which I'll give you some use cases in a moment. But yeah, it's been, we will still have a few years before it's fully adopted. That said, all these companies now are investing heavily in blockchain. We have something like 53%. The recent PwC survey had it at 53% of all of top 100 Fortune 100 companies think this is critical to their future development as a company. And so, yeah, you probably recognize some of the names on there. So there's no question that people are using it now. The different use cases are, some of them it's for supply chain provenance. So where does food come from? Tracing that from origin all the way through to consumption. Quite a lot of them are in finance. Energy is a use case. I won't go through all of them here. I'll talk in a minute, but yeah, there's a lot happening. Legal use cases. This is a great, so I recommend you all to check out Blockchain for Lawyers, the ebook by Legaler, so Legaler, which is a company by a guy called Stevie Gyasi, who's become a good friend. He was something of an idol of mine. And it's now amazing that, yeah, I'm actually with Stephenson Law, the firm I work for, is partnering with Legaler. And with their rollout of something called Legal Aid, which I'll talk about in a minute. But yeah, there are loads of legal use cases of blockchain. So it's really great that you guys are interested in this now, because it's going to have a very disruptive effect on the legal industry. Not quite as dramatic as that image of the lawyer being cut out of the picture in that video. Without a doubt, it's going to change our roles, what we do. But there are some really good examples of something called, if you look in the right, these contracts. So there is the dawn of something called smart contracts that you may have heard of. A smart contract is neither really smart nor a contract. And the greatest analogy is, you think of a vending machine. So a vending machine, you go to that and you want to put some money in to get your Twix. So you put £1 in, and if it's enough money, then you get your Twix. So if then statements are coded into it. So if it's enough money, then you get a Twix. If it's too much money, then you get your Twix and a bit of change. If it's not enough, it says, put more money in, you cheap bastard. So that is a smart contract. It's very simple. It's neither really smart. It just does exactly what you said it to. It's inflexible. And once you push go, once you press execute, it executes. We are starting to see those now coming into technology and into law, into what are called smart legal agreements. So there are a lot of concepts in law that are very hard to code, reasonableness being one, best efforts, that kind of thing. It's very difficult to hard code that. So what we're seeing is smart legal contracts. So document automation features that Jay is all over, and Catherine Bamford could talk to you about. Yeah, tools that allow you to pre-populate or quickly populate documents without typing it all out. But then you will have these executory modules that sit within a legal agreement. And to give you an example of a company acquisition, so I decide that I want to buy Jay's company. And so Jay and I agree all of the terms. We tell our lawyers all of the terms. And then we pass over to a developer to say, okay, well, could you code the execution part of that so that once we're agreed, it can just all kind of happen. And the developer will say, yeah, sure, and give you back your smart contract so that when we sign, the money automatically changes bank accounts. You don't need a lawyer to go on risk in the middle of that to give an undertaking that he'll transfer the money when the documents are signed, which is great for lawyers because we hate giving undertakings. And then you reduce almost to the point of non-existence something called counterparty risk, which is the risk that the other party will default in a transaction, which is brilliant, great for lawyers and great for both the parties. And everything happens all at once, and the company's house gets updated, Bibles are created, brilliant, all good. There is obviously a problem if the contract is coded wrong and that money doesn't go to Jay, but it goes to Jeff in the Caymans, or soon to be in the Caymans, yeah, on his yacht. So that is, oh my God. And so if as lawyers, we are unable to review those smart contract modules that are coded in Solidity or Python or whatever language it is, we are on risk as lawyers because we will be sued. So there's an argument, again, Jay could speak for hours about this, and it would be interesting about whether or not we need to learn to code as lawyers. I am of the strong opinion that yes, we do, not necessarily because we will be the ones drafting these things, but we need to be able to review them. Otherwise, we are opening ourselves up to significant levels of risk. I've delved into one. There's loads of other examples of things in there, and I invite you all to go and have a look at this book. It's not very long at all, and it's it's really interesting. There are great other use cases around signatures, so signatures that can be proven beyond a doubt and forever that you have signed a document on that date. Because again, it's still an area that's widely contested. Is everyone agrees at the point of signature of a contract what you're signing up to? But in 5 years' time, when law firms have changed, there's often dispute around which version of the document was signed. And then you say, well, that wasn't, version 1.2, that wasn't assigned. I saw version 1.1. Okay, what? And this, if it's on the blockchain, no, that's what you signed. You can't argue about it. Application law, very quickly. I realized I've got about 5 minutes before questions, so I'll speed up a bit. I think I talked about this, but there are only two that are regulated at the moment, which is security tokens and e-money tokens. Security tokens are like a share or a debt instrument. So it needs to denote or be tied in some way to the value of a company, or there needs to be some debt associated with it. E-money tokens, it's like a Bitcoin, but the key feature of that is that you have a claim on the issuer. So if I issue an e-money token, you have to be able to come back to me and say, okay, now I want my real money back. If you don't have that, it's not an e-money token. It's just an exchange token, which is Bitcoin, so not regulated. It's just a way of exchanging value between two people. And of course, you need to believe that that token itself has value, that there's no underlying asset. And finally, utility tokens I talked about earlier, to gift voucher, those aren't regulated. I won't go into it more then, but I'm happy to pick up with you guys later on that. Use cases, very quickly trotting through these. The food supply chain is massive. So currently our food supply chain is a complete mess. We saw this with Brexit. Many of you probably don't know that we almost ran out of food, apparently. It came very close because the food supply chain is incredibly disconnected. And we have problems with people, with the farmers harvesting the food, providing it in a state of ripeness that transporters accept, that will allow enough time to get to the supermarket in a state of ripeness that is accepted or not spoiled. But because of inability to prove how long it's in transit or challenges around proving that, I think something like 30% of all food that reaches a supermarket is rejected. And then, of course, there's a dispute. The farmer says, well, I gave it to you, Mr. Transporter, in a good state. Why have you been dicking around on the motorway or whatever? Why haven't you got it straight to the supermarket? And of course, the transporter says, well, no, you gave it to me in a state that was da-da-da. So the idea with blockchain is you can put it all in one place. Everyone can see in a way that everybody trusts. Remember, everyone trusts the villagers because you've got this majority consensus. And so you can drastically eliminate the amount of waste and recalls and fraud because you get a lot more transparency and visibility across the process. Legal inclusion, again, after you've read that great book by Legal Aid is transforming pro bono in law. At the moment, pro bono doesn't work at all. Law firms, if you're employed by a law firm, they usually say you get 1 or 2 days a year to do pro bono work, but they're seeing that as kind of like a gift because they still have to pay your salary. And it's very hard as a fee earner or a junior lawyer to say, okay, I want to do this project. Not always, but sometimes. Their idea is to crowdfund it. So you think like your Kickstarter, your Seedrs, a platform like that, they will put up on that a project. And a recent example is the guy who was in Hotel Rwanda, who ran the hotel, saved a lot of lives, has been recently kidnapped and arrested. And people are raising money to free him. And the way it works is you put a project up there and then that a law firm will bid for it. So maybe 4 or 5 law firms will say, okay, we'll represent this guy, but it's going to cost 25 grand. And then 25 grand is locked in and they have to raise, and everyone would put in 10 quid, 20 quid, and they'd reach 25 grand. The reason why that's great is the law firm isn't out of pocket. So law firms are incentivized to do the work and more stuff gets done. And more people get access to legal aid. This cross-border payments, very excited about this. It totally transforms, cryptocurrencies transform how we do cross-border payments. Currently, we in developing countries, a common use case is people in developing countries or emerging countries going to emerged countries and then sending money back home. So to take an example, a lot of people in Mexico go to the States to work and then send money back home to their grandparents. The problem is if their grandparents don't have access to a bank account, they're reliant on intermediary services like Western Union. And Western Union takes something like, I think, between 20 and 30% fees, 3 to 5 days to do the transfer. And at the end of that, they're usually in a bit of a dodgy part of town. So grandma needs to get on a bus, go for half an hour to an hour to the place, get it, come back. So a lot of time and huge costs. If you're sending $200, only 160 gets there. With crypto, you can now send directly to her phone, and that grandmother can then walk over to a friend or someone else, a mobile teller, a bit like an Uber type arrangement, and say, well, look, I've got 2 Bitcoin. Do you want to change that for local Mexican pesos? What rate will you give me? And they'll say, okay, I'll do it for this rate, and with only 2% fees, and you can shop around a bit between people. And basically you reduce a process that takes 3 to 5 days, 20-30%. You can do it in 20 minutes, and it can be about 2% in fees, 1.5–2%. So that you've got a $250 billion remittance market, and suddenly that money is not locked into intermediaries in the same way, and it goes into the hands of people that need it. So then you're suddenly opening up the global economy in a way that wasn't possible before. Property asset tokenization, not very interesting, but also quite cool. I've got a new client doing this. Amazingly, it's very hard for us to invest in real estate if you don't have a lot of money. And actually, it's still seen to be a very secure place to put money, and it seems to be still appreciating in value. So this way you could buy 1/1000th of a house. So you would take a house, you'd issue 1,000 tokens that are staked to that house, and then you could go in and buy one of those, and Solid Block is an example of that. So it democratizes and opens up real estate investing. There's a bunch of these coming out now. Very quickly, self-sovereign identity is huge. This is, okay, yeah, 1.1 billion people don't have access to identity around the world. If you don't have access to identity, you can't do anything. You can't own property, you can't have a house, and it's the lead domino. And this company, which actually I haven't put the name there, it's called ID 2020. They started using a blockchain solution to record the identities of refugees. And the initial problem with centralized databases was that they were getting hacked and people's identities were getting nicked. So they spread it out over a load of nodes. They spread out the data, and then it was much harder to be corrupted. And they've now become I think the #1 organization in the world for data privacy. So if you're ID 2020 certified, that means you are good for data privacy. Financial inclusion, love it. Banco Mare in Brazil, had the opportunity to work with them recently. They are a social bank that give banking to the unbanked in Brazil and the favelas. 95% people there don't have access to a bank account. They use blockchain and smartphones to create a solution that allows you access to financial services in a favela, which is amazing. I won't talk about that one too much. This is my startup with Jay. So this is, we're still slightly in stealth mode, although I'm talking about it now. So we're coming out of that. And this is using a blockchain solution to track value through an ecosystem. The initial one was money. So to see where money goes, international aid being a key one. If you give money to charity, where does it go? And it's still very hard to track that. Well, we've created a solution that allows us to do that. And it's something like $800 million of aid to Yemen disappeared. That would be a good problem to solve. And so we're looking at that. Finance is our first use case. We're now looking at energy, carbon tracking, that sort of thing. So yeah, you'll hear more about that in due course. And very finally, I'll finish on a smart contract example that I alluded to earlier. This is a really good use case of a smart contract is an artist called Imogen Heap. And she has created a smart contract on her website. So you can go direct to her website and buy her song and download it. And it will say, well, do you want the whole song? Do you just want the instrumentals? Do you just want the vocals? So if you're a film producer and you just want her instrumentals as a backing track, you can just buy that. And when you buy it, it goes to each one, a bit of that money goes to each one of her band members, but not to an intermediary. And the really cool thing is that can be out there on her website in the ether, negotiating and settling on her behalf and putting money in her bank account while she's out recording music. So you can see how that's a huge shift change as well. And again, lawyers would be in charge of drafting that and creating it. It doesn't eliminate lawyers, but once it's up there, it's it's a real gear change. That's it, guys. That was, I've still got 6 minutes left. I'm happy to stay on a bit longer after 7 if I'm not cut off to answer your questions. But yeah, hopefully that gave you a very quick introduction to blockchain. As you can see, it's vast. It's very exciting. You can probably see the passion in my face. It's changing the world. It's going to be very disruptive, but if you can understand it, and this is my pitch to you guys, it's hopefully you've seen that it is understandable. And if you can be ahead of the curve with this. And whatever industry you're in, whether it's law or whether it's are there others? Whatever industry you're in, if you can understand it, you can definitely do some exciting things with it. So if anyone's still there, thank you for listening, and happy to take some questions now.
Thank you so much, Will.
Oh, you are still there. Okay.
I just wanted to say on behalf of everybody, thank you so much for such a fascinating and engaging presentation. I think that it's such a complex topic, and you have genuinely succeeded in bringing it to life and making it really easy to understand.
Thank you, Lisa.
So anybody here, if you can open the chat box, and if you have any questions for Will, please could you drop questions into the box. In the meantime, I just wanted to follow up on a couple of the things that you were talking about.
Yeah, sure.
It's really, really interesting to think about how to stay ahead of the curve. And for any lawyers here in the audience, I'm sure we'd be really keen to hear what career advice you might have for anybody looking to get into this area, or perhaps students who are thinking, well, what can we read or learn? Likewise, existing practitioners. There's a lot to learn about code. What would be your first step?
Yeah, I might actually include Jay in this if he's up for saying something on that as well. If you got that, because I think if you're happy to chip in as well, because I think Jay's got some real wisdom to share on that as well. So if you're looking to get into blockchain as a new lawyer or an existing practitioner, the way I've done it was a twofold. One was first of all to educate myself. So you can become an expert in any subject actually quite easily. Expert is a relative term. And if you go on Amazon or your trusted bookseller and you Google the top 5 books on any subject and read them, you will be an expert in that. If you can stretch that to 10, you will be pretty much a world leader in that subject. It's amazing how little people read today, and that seems to be exponentially decreasing. Social media is quite a draw, and it's astonishing how much time you can spend. People say, I don't have enough time to read. How long did you spend on Twitter? How long did you spend on LinkedIn? LinkedIn is my poison. If you get books and read them, and a great one, someone's actually asked it already, is what are some good books on blockchain? I started with Bitcoin and the Future of Money by Dominic Frisby, who's both a comedian and an economist who writes a Money Week. Strange combination. That's where the Rhinestone story came from that I completely lifted. And I just started to read, and Bitcoin Future Money, then another one called The Blockchain Revolution by Don Tapscott. So I then felt confident enough in the subject that I could talk to people. And then I started to surround myself with people who were actually in the industry through something called the Crypto Curry Club. Big shout out to Erica Stanford and the Crypto Curry Club. Trusting with the principle, this idea that you're the average of the 5 people that you spend most of your time with. So to level up in any industry, any subject, start hanging out with, talking to, listening to people that do what you want to do and who are much better than you in that area. And you will naturally progress. It might feel uncomfortable at the beginning. You might feel like an imposter, but be there, just surround yourself in that and you will get better. And Jay is one of my 5 and is someone who is in many areas my superior. And I feel okay with that because it's kind of like we share things. But I know, Jay, in terms of getting into the industry, I know, Jay, you've definitely got something to say. So,
yeah, so, it's sort of serendipitous how Will and I met, really. And it was from me taking a leap of faith, starting to write and blog and use social media to the power of it to actually have a voice in this space and be confident enough, even though I didn't have all the answers, to sort of talk and sort of share my thoughts at where I was in that stage of my career. And a lot of it, I think Will and I differ in our approach, where he is very much about the impact and the societal changes that are going to be brought around blockchain, whereas I'm slightly jaded and less optimistic in light of things, because I generally think people are mostly horrible. So no, I'm just kidding. I think there's a tendency for power to try and hold on to itself, and I think that it's going to be interesting seeing how disruptive forces and existing power structures play with this technology. And I actually think that we'll probably see more governments issue crypto-backed assets, and governments still retaining that level of control, but decreasing the cost of doing business with government. So anyway, that's a side point. But I'm very, very interested as a technologist as to how these things work, and going sort of I like to read white papers. I like to play around with the code. I like to look under the hood about how these things really work on a technological level. And teaching myself to code was a long process. It is definitely a journey, and it's one that if you start and you want to see it through, it's not going to finish, and you need to be comfortable with that it's going to be something that you always continually do. But the way technology works at the moment is that frameworks and concepts, they keep evolving very quickly. So if you've got a core programming knowledge, when people smarter than you come up with new ways to implement it, you can hop on that train very quickly because you've already got some good fundamental skills. So if you started off even with things like JavaScript and Python, which are very accessible, very easy to learn, because there's lots and lots of platforms to teach you these things for free as well, and you're willing to put the time in, then when somebody, you know, comes up with something like Ethereum or writes a new sort of interface or a new language to interact with, you can take those learnings that you've got and see how it works. Because at the end of the day, code is written for people to tell what computers to do. It's not supposed to be a dark art. It's not supposed to be mysterious. I think people build it up as that, as it is magic. It's not magic, it's just logic. And lawyers have great logic skills. So working as a lawyer and essentially spending your whole time making decisions around if this, then that, if this parameter, if this circumstance, then this is the outcome. There is obviously artistry and nuance around good strategic lawyering and good strategic thinking. But fundamentally, when it comes down to sort of crunching documents out and crunching things out, logic is your friend, and logic is the transferable skill that lawyers have that can bring them into this space to give them relevance. And, you know, when it comes to being able to read and understand a smart contract, yes, it's great to be able to spot, you know, glaring errors, but there are things like testing frameworks and testing libraries and applications that will be built on top to help you do these things in practice, so you can be like robust in your assessment of a smart contract. So, you know, all those things are there for people who are willing to step into the arena. And I think the biggest thing that came for me is you don't need anybody's permission to do this. I probably spent too much of my career waiting to be told what to do, but I encourage people that if you are interested in this, just take the time yourself. Yes, it might mean a few evenings and weekends if it's not your current role, but eventually this is only going one way. There are more and more companies that are exposing themselves to blockchain technologies. There are more and more lawyers and law firms who need this expertise. It's not going to come from the old guard. It's going to come from new people coming in with passion, enthusiasm, and some technical abilities. And I think that's a really exciting time, because it means that younger lawyers can get an edge on the old ways of progressing to partnership, progressing through to being able to do good work and be compensated for it, because I think that's what we're all here to do. So yeah, I could keep talking forever, but I'll stop.
No, I love that. And you're a great example of someone who's pivoted in their career through all that investment in your evenings and learning, teaching yourself how to code. Yeah, very inspirational. I got another. Yeah, I'm trying to answer questions, typing while I'm listening. But yeah, hit me with another one.
Yeah, I'm picking up on the next one along, which relates back somewhat to your comment, Jay, about seeing where things are going from the government's perspective. There seems to be some resistance to crypto assets and Bitcoin. Where do you think that this is going? How do you think the FCA is going to deal with crypto assets and Bitcoin going?
Yeah, it's a great question. I was starting to type my answer to that, but it'd be a lot easier just to say it. So yeah, absolutely. So the comment there is that retail investors have been banned from buying derivative instruments tied to crypto assets. Because there's been a lot of money, a lot of people basically getting involved in things that they don't understand. This is not a new problem, but a lot of people haven't done their due diligence and lost a lot of money. So the FCA's role is to protect retail investors and protect consumers and to protect investors from loss of capital by creating a safe regulatory regime, rules that people adhere to, AML, due diligence, that sort of thing. So that the country is, and it's a really hard balance to strike, because they want to encourage innovation. They want to encourage these companies to come to the UK. And yet they have to also protect people. And one of the latest things is to restrict access to derivative instruments. And derivatives, for those who don't know, is it's quite straightforward. It's just a thing that's value is tied to an underlying asset. So typically that would be a share, but it can be anything. There are weather derivatives, anything that can have value or can you can create an instrument that's value is tied to that thing. So yeah, and cryptocurrencies are inherently or are very volatile at the moment, and that's due to speculation in the market. Again, nothing wrong with the technology. It's people. You've probably seen what's been happening with Bitcoin. You've probably read about what's happening in GameStop. There's people speculating can massively change the price of something. And so that's the FCA is trying to struggle with that. So I don't think the FCA is against cryptocurrencies, crypto assets and blockchain at all. On the contrary, I've met the people that work there and they're very for it. It's just about trying to strike a balance. Where is this going? I'm hopeful that the UK will emerge as a leading jurisdiction in this space. We had a really good run of it last year, but since new AML registration requirements have come in, there's a backlog with applications and people getting stuck in there. And there is the challenge now is if that doesn't, so certain companies are required to register with the FCA if they're doing certain things. And if that doesn't unblock, then we're not competitive compared to other strong crypto jurisdictions like Switzerland, Singapore, Malta. So yeah, I'm hopeful that things are going to improve, but I don't know. Russell, Jay, have you got anything to add on that?
Yeah, I think just a couple of bits, like looking to the future about, you know, I think this is where that first video we saw, how we're going to cut out the middlemen and cut out the intermediaries. I disagree with that, because I think it's like a fundamental thing of humans to delegate things. Like I could change and like paint my walls, fit a bathroom. I could in theory do that. But the fact that we like to specialize in things and to bring in other people to do things for us, I still think that, you know, if I'm managing a portfolio of assets or managing a portfolio of property that happens to be recorded on the blockchain, I'm still going to pay someone to manage that for me if I've got wealth, because I don't want to spend my time clicking buttons, writing code, doing things to interact with my property. So I think fundamentally we're still going to be agents, but we're going to act in a different way. And we're going to need to understand how to move things around on blockchains. We're going to need to understand how to like take a client's instructions and tell them what we've done is robust and legit and what they wanted us to do. So I don't think that it's the same thing with like AI. Like AI is not going to replace lawyers. It's just going to empower lawyers, and our roles change because we just deploy AI at scale and could do more, but we're still sitting in the middle of the transaction because high net worth people don't like to get their hands dirty with anything. You know, they're too busy with leisure time and enjoying stuff. What I do think will be interesting is around sort of the ability that with traditional, assets, stocks and shares, that the markets open and close, right? We open at like 8 o'clock, we close at 4:30, but with a crypto asset, it'll just remain open all the time. So there's this fallacy that the future is like we're supposed to have more leisure time and less work, when actually we're just maximizing the amount of work and value we can do for people 24/7. So you'll be able to sort of make profit at 11 o'clock at night. It doesn't matter anymore. And a lot of that stuff will be automated too. Can I share my screen? Is that possible?
Yeah, that's possible, Jay.
Yeah, is that possible? I promise. Like, I've got a lot of stuff up, so I've got to be careful what I share. But there's a really great infographic which for me gets me really excited about crypto assets and blockchain, because if you've ever read like Sapiens, which I've only just finished recently, there's quite a lot in the chapter towards the end of the book about the formation of language and the reasons that the Sumerians or whoever, ancient cultures developed writing was to keep records of stuff. It was mostly around accounting rather than prose and poetry and literature. It was actually accounting that started, the reason why we write things down. And I think it was originally like base 16 or base 36 or something. But that and the ability for us to now outsource record keeping to cryptographic ledgers is the next step in our evolution of how we share information and property rights and how we manage that. Now, looking at this chart is super interesting to me, because this is updated for 2020, so it doesn't have quite the 2021 values. But there's a fundamental misunderstanding about what money and an economy actually is. And what we're seeing now with game and the rest of it is really interesting, because it's shining a light on how money moves in big ways, what hedge funds do, what derivatives are. And it's bringing that vernacular into sort of the everyday life again. Because most of the time we just think about the money in our bank account and what we get paid and nothing else. But if we look at where like cryptocurrencies are at the moment, still like a tiny fraction of what we count as value and money. But what interests me is if you look down here and you look at, say, the debt on the federal balance sheet, billionaires like Jeff Bezos is probably half of that. Look at the value of gold, look at the value of the stock market, all stock markets, and then what money supply is in terms of, this is like money that you can see in a bank. I think this is the physical money, like cash and coinage. But what really is interesting is, well, 2 points. One, global debt sort of equals everything above. So there's this balance that money and debt are the same thing. If you create debt, you create money in someone else's place. Some really cool videos on that if you want to understand that, and with all the quantitative easing that's happening at the moment, like money supply is just going through the roof, which has an impact on assets. So, but the thing that's really interesting is that all of that, and then all of the real estate is dwarfed by derivatives. So you saw everything that came above. Look at derivatives. Look how big that is, how much value is in derivatives, because a derivative can be created out of thin air. I can bet Will that tomorrow it's going to rain. We can create value around that. We can write a contract, sell it to someone else as well. This is what we do as humans. And this is where blockchain is going to be the biggest thing, because there's a ton of friction with that. Moving derivatives around, buying them, recording them, settling them is expensive. And that's where, big magic circle firms, big hedge funds, big banks, this is why they are important. And I'm really interested to see what happens when we can write all of that on a blockchain and everybody else can participate in it. Like that for me is the promise. And that I think is going to be really disruptive. So I love sharing that with people, because I don't think people really understand like how economics works, what money is, what value is, how it's created. Because essentially it's just promises between people. Nothing really has value unless we can enforce that on someone else. Like I could have 10 billion Will coins in my wallet, but if I can't actually coerce people to do things and enforce my property rights over it, it doesn't really matter. So yeah, really interesting. And I think that's the direction that is going to come out from this. So.
Thank you both. We may have a few, we have a cut off at about 15:15, but do you have time for any more questions?
Yeah, I'm here.
If people want to stick around, if anyone needs to drop off, just before you go, could I give a plug to Will and Jay, who are both speaking again on the 18th of February. So please come back, hear more. We've got a panel of speakers at that event. There's going to be Adi Ben Ari from Applied Blockchain and Andy Gray, who's a developer at BlockRocket, which is based in Manchester and has set up Blockchain Manchester as well. So please do look out for that event. I'm picking up on a question that was higher up in the thread from Ben about how the crypto puzzles are made. Can either of you address that question?
What do you mean by crypto puzzles? I didn't see the question.
You mean to a degree, yes. So, but also no.
Do you mean just like how a block is added, or like what the puzzle or the cryptographic bit looks like?
It just says how the crypto puzzles are made. If Ben is still on here, please feel free to drop something in the chat
okay. Well,
I can, you go. I can answer.
I can talk a bit around like the technology and hashes. So essentially, we use encryption all the time. This is the thing, that blockchain is not not a new technology. It's several technologies together applied in an innovative way. Like, you must remember that cryptography has been part of human existence for a long time, with like Caesar's cipher, like sending secret messages to his troops and the rest of it. Like, this is fundamentally, we have this in our DNA. And the way the blockchains are like verified, and the reason that we trust one over another is because we know that the proof of work and the longest chain is the one that is the truthful chain. That if somebody tried to corrupt and add a new block that had fictitious information on it, then it would be very, very difficult to keep adding further blocks that contained real information on. So the longer chain eventually catches up, which is why actually when you're making Bitcoin transactions, you sort of need to wait a minute to just check that it went through the way you expected it to. And the way it works is there are algorithms that you can look them up. Like, I think SHA is, I forget what it stands for, but like SHA is a very well-known algorithm. I think it was developed by like the NSA or an American institution, like government one. And it's very, very hard to reverse, as Will suggested. You put something in, the algorithm spits out a number. And if you look at like a block on a blockchain, it starts with multiple zeros. And basically what it's trying to do is you've got to guess the number that brings forward the amount of zeros, and it's really difficult to do. And what all the mining factories and farms are doing is they're adding processing power to try and guess that number. And once that number is like achieved, then they could be like, great, okay, I've got it. They get a tiny bit of Bitcoin back for the privileges doing it, and it adds it on. And what's interesting is that if one character was wrong, or they got literally like one character within the data that's stored in the block is wrong, it won't match that. It won't equal the same thing. So there's real fundamental mathematics that happen on it before they're sort of added on and added on and added on. And yeah, it's not the best way to do it, because there's a huge environmental cost, there's a huge processing power cost, but it does make it verifiable, and it does make it hard to cheat. Like, you may have seen that in the past, that when people have when there's been like massive fraud on a wallet, for example, like somebody let their public key available and that was stolen, that people have tried to like fork a new chain, and you can in theory do it. Like, if everybody just agrees to start working on a different chain, they can fork and go in different directions. But if people want to say, this is our sole source of truth, we're going to follow this chain, we follow the longest chain, that's what we've agreed to do, then that's what will play out in the blockchain. So there's a really great tutorial that's quite interactive called Crypto Zombies, where you can write some code, you can write some Solidity, and you can actually create your own token. So Ethereum is interesting because you can create tokens on top of the Ethereum blockchain, or on top of Ether in a sense, and you can sort of play around. It's kind of like how CryptoKitties work and stuff. And that's quite fun, just to wet your whistle, to sort of get a little taste of how you might play one of these things out. So
I would add to that, but Ben, I suggest we pick up maybe offline, because it gets very. I can add to that as well and get really into the weeds about how the transactions are assembled into a block and then hashed and everything. But we'll lose everyone else, I think, on the call if we get that into the weeds. So I suggest, feel free to add me on LinkedIn and we can catch up about that in more detail. There's one question I would like to answer if anyone's still there, which is just about what work are we doing at Stephenson Law? And do we actually have any blockchain clients, which I think was insinuated. I don't know if the person who asked that question is still here, but yes, we do. Yeah, go on.
The next question about where there are areas of overlap between lawyers and coders, maybe as well, and perhaps
that's Jay. That's not me.
Questions at once.
Yeah, I didn't see the question. Is it where's the overlap between lawyers and coders?
I think it's what work are you doing, and there's a gap where lawyers know all about the law and regulations, and coders know code and tech. How do you combine those two? And what are you
make Jay?
Yeah, I think that's where Will and I make a decent team, is that Will knows a lot more about commercial law and regulatory law than I do. And not to take anything away from Will's like deep level understanding, but I nerd out about the technical.
Oh yeah.
I like looking at smart contracts. I like writing them. I like teaching people about them. I like exploring them. And typically, like, a smart contract is not like 300 pages. It's usually might be 50 lines, and you can spend some time and quickly write some tests and understand what it does. Whereas a 300-page like banking agreement, oh God, I'd be lost. I'd cry and run away probably.
I have that same reaction actually.
Yeah, that's interesting. But I think the type of work we're doing, so we work for clients who build things on blockchains or use the technology or have related like apps that are around finance a lot of the time as well. But we also act for companies that build their own layer one protocols, so like brand new versions of blockchains that they create their own ecosystems from. So we do varied work. And a lot of it is around regulatory stuff, but there's some strategic thinking, there's tax involved as well. Like, understanding what their business does is really, really helpful, because it means we can see the blind spots that they don't have as people that are interested in tax, regulation, law, accounting. So we can bring all those things together and use a wide network of advisors. Like, we rarely advise on our own. Like, it's always a collaborative effort, and sometimes it's multi-jurisdictional as well. So we speak to people in Jersey and Europe and South America, like all these things that come together.
Yeah, that's a key. Go on. No,
yeah, and just thinking, like, as a technologist, like I was listening and doing some work at the same time, and I'm using sort of coding and even some lower code tools. So I'm not writing like hard Python here. I'm using a document assembly platform, but I'm writing some logic statements. I'm writing some code into the document to make it spit things out and doing variables and variable names. So that sort of thing is really helpful in terms of service delivery. Like the emphasis on commerciality and doing things quickly and cost effectively has never been stronger. So if you can code even just a little bit, you can understand how you can leverage technology and tools that are provided for you to really increase your productivity, like dramatically, like tenfold. So that's kind of like where the intersection sits, and probably why I do, I get involved in blockchain work. I'm really interested in that, but I also am interested in service delivery across all platforms and all service lines that we have. So yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Thank you.
Yeah. Again, I'm happy to say a bit more about the kind of work we do, but equally happy to take another question. Quantum computing. Let's not do that now. Ben will pick up later. But yeah, quantum cryptography.
I think we've got about 3 minutes still. So if you have any final words, perhaps people could pick up with you afterwards on LinkedIn if they've got.
Yeah. So do add me on LinkedIn. I'm sure we can send a thing around with my LinkedIn handle. Otherwise, you know my name, so come and find me. But yeah, it's a very, very exciting time to be in law and entering law. And I would just say, do what Jay and I have done, which is if you're interested in something, read about it, spend time with people that do it, and be bold and start to do things that, maybe there aren't other people in your firm or other people in your network necessarily that are doing it. But it's hugely exciting to do it. I mean, I get to work with some of the best people in the world now in this area, which is an immense privilege and very, very exciting. And we're trying to solve some really, really big problems at the moment, which again is gets me out of bed in the morning. So the more people that I can get excited by this, who then want to learn about it, that maybe I get a chance to work with, then I live for that. So thank you everyone who stayed this long. It's really appreciate it, and really do connect, and would love to chat with you in the future. And thank you guys for hosting me. Really appreciate it. It's been fun.
Thank you so much, Will. Absolutely fascinating, brilliant, and inspirational. So look forward to seeing and hearing from you again at the next session on the 18th.
Cool. Yeah, I'll be there.
Absolutely.
All right, thanks, everyone.
Yeah, that was really great, Will. Thanks for presenting. That was amazing.